Hello again, I'm Audie Jake, and welcome back to Autistic Reviews, the series in which I review media featuring autistic characters on the basis of how good it is representation-wise. So for this week's video, I have decided to do a sort of sequel video to one of my earliest videos. A couple months ago, I did a video taking a look at the Autism episode of PBS's Arthur titled When George Met Carl. While the characterization was a little stereotypical, overall, I thought the representation was quite good. I liked how positive it was, and I loved the way it explained autism with a metaphor that was one of the best autism metaphors I've heard. In that review, I mentioned that I liked that he wasn't just a one-off character, and that he shows back up in future episodes. Well, for this video, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at the remaining episodes that Carl appears in. According to the wiki, after the original episode, Carl appears in 8 episodes and a special. I'm going to take a look at each of these episodes and see if the representation improves, stays about the same, or gets worse. So let's see once again if Arthur has a simple message that comes from the heart. First, I just want to mention the episodes where Carl only has the cameo. In the season 16 episode, Baseball Blues, Carl is one of the members of the Little League team, but he doesn't have any speaking lines. He also has a very brief cameo in the episode LaDonna Compson Party Animal, Brain Freeze, and Arthur Takes a Stand. He also has a cameo in the Arthur special DW and the Beastly Birthday. It's nice that they included him for these episodes, but I wish they would have given him more to do. Now let's talk about episodes in which Carl actually plays big roles. Carl's next appearance on the show is just one season later, in the 10th episode of the 14th season, titled Buster Spaces Out. In the episode, Buster is watching old footage of the moon landing, and it makes him want to build a rocket of his own and go to the moon. But first, he decides to start small with a model rocket. Eventually, Buster decides that he can't do it alone and recruits some of his friends to help, including Arthur, George, Francine, Muffy, and Carl. We actually find out in this episode that this is the first time that any of George's friends have met Carl. Buster says, "Wait, who's this?" And George replies, "This is Carl. Trust me, you want him on the team. He knows a ton about rocket ships." At which point, Carl starts info-dumping about rockets. I really like that for his second appearance, they switched up his special interest from trains to rockets, as his stereotypical special interest was something that I complained about in the original episode. I also like when Carl says, "My favorite book is on rockets. I've read it 35 times. As interacting with your special interest over and over again, instead of doing something new, is something I find very relatable. A small detail that I like is that when every one of the kids is fighting over the rocket pieces, Carl is just calmly working on his piece and doesn't even notice the fight until it's over. I like this because I find it very relatable to be spacing out and not notice what's happening in the background. After a bunch of hiccups, they were able to launch the rocket and it's a success. I rather like this episode and I'm glad that they decided to include Carl and flesh out his character some more. The next episode we're going to talk about is the second half of the 7th episode of season 17, titled Go Fly a Kite. At the start of the episode, someone, spoiler I guess, but it turns out to be Carl, loses a kite and it's found by LaDonna, Muffy, and Binky. The kids decide to keep the kite, but decide each person gets the kite for 1 week. Eventually, the 3 of them get into a fight over the kite when Carl shows up. Carl doesn't like them fighting and says, "Quiet, there's too much noise, you're hurting my ears," while covering his ears with his hands. I like that they depict him having sensitivity to noise. Carl then tells them that the kite was actually his and he lost it. The third episode we're looking at is the first half of the third episode of season 20. He Said, She Said. Buster, Arthur, George, and Carl are all gathered at Arthur's house to watch a Bionic Bunny episode. I like the moment when George asks Carl if he's seen Bionic Bunny, and George replies, "I've seen 1 episode, it wasn't that realistic." Very straightforwardly. I also really like the face Carl makes at the confusing way that Buster describes what a special is. Very understandable. Alistics can be very confusing. The cable goes out and they decide to describe what happens in the episode, but none of them can remember exactly what happens except for Kara. Eventually, everyone starts arguing, which causes Kara to get overloaded, at which point he covers his ears and says, "It's too noisy, stop yelling." I also like the concern that George shows for Kara. He asks him if he's okay, and when Kara says it's too loud, he gets everyone to be quiet. Though I feel like I should point out the counterintuitiveness of stopping the loud noise by loudly yelling quiet. That probably bothered Kara too, but whatever. Eventually, the episode ends with Kara telling them what he remembers about the episode. I also love how utterly uninterested he is in the show. The entire time, he's just interested in playing with the blocks with the W. The final episode that we're going to be looking at today is the first half of the 7th episode of the 19th season, titled Kara's Concerto. This is the first episode to be pretty much exclusively about Kara since the original episode. In the episode, George is putting on a puppet show, and when he finds out Kara plays the accordion, he asks him to play for the show. I like the bit where George tells Kara that he's good at the accordion, and Kara just replies, "Yes, I know," very matter-of-factly. I feel like that's something I would have done as a kid. I also like the bit about Kara practicing his social skills, and how stolidly he says, "How are you, George?" I also like Kara's mom pointing out that he doesn't have to play for George's show if it makes him uncomfortable, which is wonderful parenting. I'm glad that she pointed out that he has a choice in the matter, and gave him agency in it. Also, I love the moment where George sticks out his hand for a handshake, and Kara mistook it as him asking for some grapes, and puts a handful of grapes in his hand instead. I got a laugh out of that because of how relatable it was. It was a nice moment. At one point, while they're practicing, Kara gets upset because it's too messy inside where they're practicing, so they all agree to practice outside. Then, when they start to practice, Kara puts his stuff away because, according to his routine, it's time for lunch. Then Kara decides he has to go home to replace the reed on his accordion, which interrupts practice again. Eventually, George gets concerned that Kara's need for routine will ruin the show, and he considers replacing him with Binky. George is unable to tell Kara that he wants to replace him, so when the day of the show comes, Kara is able to play and it goes perfectly. I love the ending to this episode, where George is doubting that Kara can do it because of his autistic traits, but as it turns out, it was never even a concern for Kara. He was aware of his own limitations and believed he could do it. The only negative for this episode is that I wish that at the end, George would have told Kara about his plans to replace him, and apologize for doubting him when Kara didn't doubt himself. So positives. I really like that they brought the character back and expanded on him a bit. I love the little details they have, like with him missing social cues, for instance. And I like that they gave him another special interest. It's really cool that they showed that autistic people can gain new special interests or have multiple ones. That's not something I see very often in autistic representation. And I still really like how consistently positively he is portrayed. He is never portrayed as a burden at any point. The only negative is that it's still a bit stereotypical. I'm really glad that he wasn't just a one-off character and they made the effort to bring him back. These episodes were pretty good, and I still think that Kara is a good addition to the cast. I hope he comes back at some point in the future. Have you seen any of these episodes, or do you plan to? What did you think of them? Did you agree or disagree with anything I said? Let me know in the comments down below. Until next time, goodbye!